a petroleum economist. Don't adjust your set. I'm the guest host today. I'm not a panelist. I'm joined by three excellent panelists today on Monday, the 19th of May. That's Omar Nadia, derivatives trader at BB Energy, Laurie Haytien, MENA Director at Natural Resources Governance Institute, and Omar Al Ubaidli. He's the Director of Research at Bahrain Center for Strategic International Energy Studies. Welcome, everyone. Now, I'd like to kick off with Omar, if I may. We've had some maybe bullishness, so to speak, with on tariffs. We've had some probably bearishness with the Iran news. How are you reading things, Omar, right now?
So no, I don't see it as bullish. So I don't see the Iran news as bullish. There's basically inevitabilities in life, and the inevitability is that the US will make a deal with Iran. But let's put it this way: the US will not attack Iran no matter what. And the reason is that the risk reward is not there and you can forget about it. And the US basically, in terms of economically, is extremely weak. In terms of politically, is even weaker. And in terms of militarily, is, weak as well. So we don't see any bullishness to do with Iran. We see weakness. Everything in the markets, anything in exogenous markets is basically inflationary, everything from tariffs to equities to expectations of inflation expectations, everything to basically stimulus to the Trump plan to cut taxes and increase spending. It's all massively inflationary. The only thing that's deflationary and the only lever that the US can pull, deflationary lever, is lower oil prices. So we think oil prices are headed lower. Substantially so.
Substantially so. So we're not. You don't. So just to follow up, you don't think we're staying in this $60 to $70 range where we're seeing right
No,
now? You think it's definitely a level down?
I'd look for oil to set new lows. So the last low was around $55. We need to go down to about 45, maybe 40, and then basically see what happens. But everything is inflationary, and the only deflationary lever is oil. And I think they pull it. I think OPEC will continue to increase supplies. I think that oil is the most geopolitically traded asset, if you like, and I think they have a plan. I don't think it's by accident that OPEC Plus suddenly decides we're going to increase by 100,000 next month. We're going to increase by 400,000, etc., etc. So the trap is that most people look at oil, look at it in real terms, and say, yeah, everything's gone up except oil. So look at oil in gold prices, look at oil in STP prices, look at oil in any prices. It's really cheap. I think it's going to get a lot cheaper.
Thanks, Laurie. If I can turn to you and pick up on the theme of Iran that Omar is so strong, had such strong opinions about. What's your take on whether Iran a US deal will happen in the short term, medium term, long term? How do you see these negotiations playing out?
So good morning to you and all. Basically, we had a good like the negotiations had a good start, a good push. Everything looked okay, and then you had these conflicting messages coming out of the U.S. administration about what are the conditions for the deal. Especially regarding the enrichment. Is it like they need to stop completely the nuclear program or some sort of hold? All of that, I guess, has been picked up by the Iranians, and then now we see that the Iranians are countering back on that, saying that what, our program is going to continue, nothing is going to stop it, but we will continue with them negotiating as well. So the conflicting messages that are coming from Iran now, basically, I guess both of them, they would need a deal. Definitely, the Iranians is very clear they need the deal to remove the sanctions. They've seen that President Trump can take a decision within minutes about lifting sanctions, the way he has done for Syria. So now they see that, okay, so maybe we can get to a place where we can have a deal with him to remove all the sanctions. It is important for them to remove the sanctions for their economic revival. On the other side, I guess, for President Trump as well, he needs to have a deal to appease the region, especially after that he has done all these trillions of dollars of deals and agreements with the Gulf states. So he needs the Gulf states to be very stable, to have good economies so that they can continue even to invest in the US and continue this investment. So I think it's like in both interest to get to a deal, but how to get it and how pragmatic they will be and flexible and how they will play on the words, that's very, very important to watch. And like this is what will come in the next phase after the President Trump finished his trip in the Gulf, and we've seen all the deals that he has made. So watching and more closely to see next meetings, what will come out of it, and but I guess like they might reach a deal not very soon. And as Omar said, maybe for different reasons, but I don't think the US are keen on a strike on the Iranians. But at the same time, they're putting it as a card on the table that, you know what, if you don't agree to our terms, we might use that. And definitely the Israelis will be very happy to take that on board as well, because I think today, the only one that could sabotage any kind of success for the US president being with the Gulf or Iran or on other, basically on the Gulf and on Iran, mainly on Iran, is Israel. So that is maybe where the threat might come now on any kind of thing. But looking into this, so looking into next phases of the negotiations, messagings are very important, like mixed messages that are coming from them, looking when the next meeting will be, and then take it from there. So it's like every day is good, is different news. So watching there, but I think on the long term there is an interest from both sides to have a deal.
Thank you, Laurie. Omar, if I could, Omar Al-Budai, I should say Omar A to differentiate between the two Omars I got on my panel. I just realized that it could be confusing. So Omar, if I don't mind, Omar A and Omar M. So Omar A, if I can carry on with the Iran story here, because we've been here before. We've been here before, you know, many times before. It's a deal was on the table, 50-50, it's going to happen. Under Biden, you know, Trump was the guy originally who went hardline on sanctions back in his first term. What's changed this time? What's different? Why is there a renewed sense of optimism? Do you feel that we're going to get a deal over the line?
I think that there's a good chance of a deal, but the problem is that, well, there's two obstacles. If it's the kind of deal, first of all, a Congress on the issue of Iran is more hardline than President Trump. And so if he has to get congressional approval, which is, I think, highly likely, then the deal that the negotiators strike is unlikely to be acceptable to Congress, or will face severe obstacles from Congress, because there's a lot of individuals in Congress who like to project a very strong, hardline, anti-Iran, pro-Israel stance, and being what would, from the White House perspective, be considered intransigent regarding the deal, would be a way of them sort of exercising their influence. And I would also say that whatever deal they strike is unlikely to achieve the goal of long-term peace and stability, which is it may be more a deal for the sake of a deal, because you've got an intractable problem, which is that Iran wants to be able to pursue its nuclear program for peaceful reasons, or otherwise, according to its own interests, and Israel fervently wants to deny Iran that capability, and both are heavily armed and have all sorts of opposing interests. And so even if a deal is struck, you haven't tackled the fundamental problem, which is the deep conflict of interest between these two countries. So really, even if a deal were to be struck and found to be acceptable to Congress, I'm not very optimistic about it delivering a sustainable solution to the problems that we have in the Middle East.
Thank you. Omar, if I can, Omar N, I can turn to you and put this back into the markets and pick up what you were saying earlier about that you're extremely bearish on oil prices and bring it back to prices. Now, Now, is this bearishness? You said it was most of the things you're talking about inflationary, but is this a demand-led story? You know, is this the market still driven by demand weakness? Is that still back? Is that still driving sentiment to a large degree? I mean, because if you think if you know the arguments that have been out there, you know, if we come down to $60 a oil, we start choking off non-OPEC supply. A lot of the OPEC barrels that are coming into the market are arguably already out there. It's kind of just an acknowledgement that barrels are already there. What's, where's this extra bearishness coming from your side?
So basically, you gotta look at the how people are describing the oil market, right? So first of all, they tell you that oil is finished and we're transitioning into whatever green fuels, sunlight, wave, and stuff from trees and all this kind of stuff, right? And then on the other hand, they tell you, yeah, but demand, what's demand going to do? Well, if you basically transitioning, right, then by implication, you're saying demand is not there. Even if you look at something like Iran, 90% of the stuff they sell goes to China. So whether they implement sanctions, the US implement sanctions or not, you're not talking about any extra oil coming on the market, right? Or any extra oil being removed from the market. Even if there is a deal, you're talking maximum 200, 300,000 barrels. So it's not, this is basically the extra bearishness is coming from a messaging perspective, right? So basically you tell people the market is bullish because the US is going to do, going to basically hit Iran. The market is bullish basically because they're going to sanction all the oil. The market is bullish because, we're going to, sanction Russia, maximum. Blah, blah, blah. But once you start to take these things away, no attack on Iran because they can't. No sanctions on Iran because it doesn't make a difference. No sanctions of Russia because it doesn't make a difference. All of a sudden, that narrative disappears completely. So when somebody comes and asks you, so why did you just bet X amount of dollars on the oil price going up? You're like, oh, I don't know. There's no narrative anymore. It's all disappeared. So this is what I think is basically happening in terms of the market. And people who think that basically, you can measure demand, demand today is 10 million barrels, whatever. It's laughable, right? So the market, oil prices are fluctuating by the second. Does that mean basically supply and demand is fluctuating by the second? I supply today. No. It's not. It's basically sentiment, right? So what you're seeing, I think, is the lack of bullish sentiment. Finally, if you have basically like the Fed coming out and saying, we're going to sell the dollar, what do? You sell the dollar. You don't say, no, I think the dollar's going up, right? So if OPEC Plus is coming out and selling, we're going to flood the market with oil, well, you're going to sell oil. I mean, it's simple stuff, really.
So it's a sentiment-driven market, that's but what about the argument? And to follow up on that point, what about the argument that at these prices, non-OPEC supply gets choked off? We're at a level where, especially US shale, which was the big driver, and some of the others at sort of 60. If you're going to levels lower, or does that take time to filter through to the?
No, but that's the point, right? So the US comes and says to Saudi, look, we've got basically shale, you've got these producers in wherever it is, Kazakhstan, and this new oil discovery in Papua New Guinea, whatever. So they're going to challenge you, but they're going to, they need to invest 3 years, 5 years, they come to market. Why don't you kill them off, stop them off at the knees by flooding the market now? And then when prices go back up, you have a playing field where you increase market share, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's the deal. And for people who think that Trump cares about shale, shale employs, I don't know how many people, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, but the US population is 330 million. So who does he care more about, shale or people filling gas at the pumps? So, it's bearish, our view.
Okay, thank you. Laurie, if I can come back to you, and talk a bit more about the geopolitics of the region in the Middle East. You mentioned Israel, obviously, and and the whole Gaza situation. We've seen some, arguably in some way, some positivity improvements to the region. You know, talk of the Red Sea and the key choke points being, improving shipping routes. How do you see the wider region playing out? You put together Israel with Iran and the backdrop of Trump coming to the region, and he needs that peace for all these investment deals to work. Does he need peace in Gaza as well? How does this play out across the wider region?
Look, he doesn't need, the most important is like what we've learned since 7 October. It's like, you remember before 7 October, everyone was discussing again about this free open space that President Trump and the US have, about like the IMAC project, which would change the trade in the region and worldwide, connecting Asia through the Middle East to Europe. There were like all of these talks about this connecting and connectivity projects. And all of a sudden, 7 October happens, and it reminds us that there are like the Palestinian people that need to be part of whatever you're deciding about the region and connecting the region to the whole world, and you cannot just ignore them. So for that, if we just want to take from 7 October and not like history before and the right of people to have a decent life and exist and be having to live the way they'd like to live, it's like this issue cannot continue, and the way it is continuing. And I guess President Trump now, maybe because he's in a disagreement with Prime Minister Netanyahu on the way forward, so he's kind of putting him aside, and maybe that's why he's highlighting the issue of what's happening, like the humanitarian issue in Gaza. And then, so I think that's good, because he is in disagreement with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So maybe then he would find a better way of moving forward with the Palestinian issue, besides that Gaza Riviera and all of that vision that he had at the beginning, saying that, yeah, we'll put the Gazans out, we'll build Gaza for whoever wants to, etc. I don't see him talking about this anymore, but now he's talking about like people are starving and people are dying from hunger, and that's hopeful he will find. He will work on a solution, and definitely going to the Gulf and going to Saudi Arabia and putting back Saudi Arabia as the main player for the region. That means that between Saudi Arabia and the US, they might work out a new a way to end the misery of the Palestinians in Gaza, and find a solution to connect the Palestinians to the big projects that we are having in the region. Do I know what that is? I don't know. The last we had, it was the proposal by the Egyptians, by the Jordanians after the Gaza Riviera idea, but after that, back to other stuff, but not talking much about like the solution. I think now again everyone is talking about like ending the misery, and then but not very clear again about the few political process. But I think that this is again something that Saudi Arabia will pick up after like the Trump visit euphoria, and think about, okay, so we need to find a solution for the Palestinians, so that they are a positive a component in this connectivity projects that we're back on track, that is back on track. And then, so I wish I had a clearer idea about where to go, but it's like really difficult with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the government that currently he has. And the problem is like, is there an alternative? So, you know, it was always said about the Arab regimes that, okay, if we remove one, what's the alternative? We don't have the alternative, so let's stick to what we have. I think today everyone is like thinking the same about Netanyahu. Like, okay, so if Netanyahu goes, like, what's the alternative? There might come back because of the fabric, that the social fabric, the political fabric that has changed in Israel and that became more extreme than ever. So I think now people in the Arab world are saying that most probably we don't have a partner for peace in Israel, the way that Netanyahu used to say before about, like, we don't have a partner for peace in Palestine. I think we're in a situation now, even if Saudi Arabia wants to make peace with Israelis, but they feel that there is no partner for peace because of what Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir have been doing. So that's the situation where we are in. I guess the Arab region is ready. The Gulf is ready. Saudi Arabia is ready. I guess even Syria is ready for peace, but they feel like, okay, who's the counterpart to sign a peace deal on the Israeli side? Bibi Netanyahu is making it very hard for those who want peace in the region to really get that peace deal. If that would give fairness to the Palestinians as well.
Yeah. We've got the survey question here coming up. How will Moody's downgrade of US credit rating impact oil markets? Are we bullish, bearish, or no impact? And while people are thinking about that answer, Omar A or Omar Al, I'd like to bring you back onto some of these points that Laurie brought up in the strategic wider strategic Middle East region. And I think first and foremost, I think one of the most important things, I know it's been talked about quite a bit, but the deal between the US and Saudi, especially in the relationship between Saudi and the US, it seems to be gone to a new level, or was it already always like that? And Saudi Arabia seems becoming a much more important player in terms of not just as a oil energy player, but also as a diplomatic player. You know, how do you read that, and how important is that going forward for energy and the strategic part of the region?
Well, I think, you know, US has had a good relationship with Saudi Arabia for a long time. I think at the moment, if there is a nominal improvement, a lot of that owes to Saudi Arabia's détente or rapprochement with Iran, because prior to its rapprochement with Iran, the US was trying to put pressure to put Saudi Arabia in a corner and force it to normalize with Israel, by denying it security or threats of denying security and so on and so forth. But what Saudi Arabia has intelligently done is eliminated a significant or reduced a significant amount of the security threats it's facing in the region by improving its relationship with Iran considerably. And therefore, the threat of US non-intervention in a security crisis is a lot less threatening than it was before. And that's forced the US to have to be more conciliatory and return to its more positive traditional stance towards Saudi Arabia. And in particular, you know, Saudi Arabia has a very important role to the US in two respects. The first is that the overarching goal of the US is to get out of the region or to decrease its footprint in the region. And if Saudi Arabia were to normalize with Israel, that would be a strong step towards stability in the region in the long run. So that's a big carrot that Saudi Arabia can dangle in front of the US. It can help it decrease its need to be a security guarantor in the region. And secondly, on a shorter or medium-term horizon, it's a source of economic wealth for the US. It buys US goods, arms, AI solutions, and so on and so forth. And that part of the relationship is certainly of great benefit to both sides. What you're seeing is, as I say, a reflection of the benefits of the diplomatic overtures that Saudi Arabia has made towards Iran. And although the situation in the region remains highly precarious for all the reasons that Laurie mentioned, At least Saudi Arabia is in a better position than it was prior to its détente with Iran. It has more options and fewer threats.
That's a good point. Just to follow up on that as well. You said about the US ultimately wants to get out of the region, but doesn't it have such an important a role? You know, while it relies on oil, while it relies on you know, the energy in the Middle East, doesn't it want to be part of that role? You know, it has that sort of, you know, we're here, we're helping you guys out. You know, isn't there a bit of a quid pro quo here?
So historically, the reason for the US's involvement in Middle East can be whittled down to two primary factors. The first was sorry, just turn my phone off. The first was the importance of oil to the US economy and to the global economy. But that's no longer really there. I mean, the US is the biggest oil producer in the world, and it doesn't import huge amounts of oil from the region. And it's not, you know, not a critical element of its economy in the way that it was. The second was, and this is where its relationship with Israel was important, is that it was part of the Cold War face-off with the Soviet Union. And in particular, the Middle East was one of the many battlegrounds where the US wanted to ensure that, you know, its capitalist Western model took a foothold, and the communist Soviet model didn't make any advances. But since the end of the Cold War, you know, that ideological Cold War and military Cold War has come to an end. So again, it's not really very important from that perspective either. What still remains is, first of all, you know, as Laurie intimated, a very strong Israeli lobby, which continues to influence US politics, perhaps in a manner that exaggerates the strategic importance of the region to the US. And secondly, you also have the fact that even though the US doesn't consume the region's energy, its primary geopolitical adversary, which is China, does still consume energy. So the US isn't going to relinquish control of the energy supplies of its primary geopolitical adversary anytime soon. Nevertheless, even taking into account those factors, it still doesn't have the importance that it used to, and it has you know, bigger fish to fry in the Indo-Pacific, and that was telegraphed very clearly by President Obama when he mentioned the pivot to Asia, and then the policies of subsequent presidents have reflected this most clearly. In, you know, when you can describe the high point, the zenith of the US involvement in the region militaristically is 1991 during the liberation of Kuwait, where the US took a very clear, very forceful role in maintaining order. But then on the flip side, you've got everything that's happened since 2019 with the attacks in Abqaiq and in the UAE, where the US has either not intervened or intervened very nominally. And even in the Straits of Hormuz and in the Bab al-Mandab, it's mostly been very defensive and protective measures. Only the Houthis have really been on the end of any significant US military activity. But the piracy that's been going on in the Straits of Hormuz has been met only with US defensive measures and not any attempt to hold the perpetrators accountable. And that's reflective of the fact that the US in 2025 and its outlook of the region is very different to that in 1991, when there was a very sort of prominent display of power and willingness to be involved.
Thank you. A great overview, Omar. Thank you. And now we'd look to the results of the survey question. We seem to have a bit of a split between bearish and no impact, given that partly given the other two agencies have already downgraded the US, so the two other big ones. Omar, if I can get the last word from you on this survey question, and you know, your thoughts on this downgrade and what it means for the markets.
So basically, I think it's absolutely massive. So you've seen 10-year now is trading above 4.5%, right? So treasuries, the yield on 10-year treasuries is trading over 10.5%. What that is telling you is that the market expects more treasuries to be issued. The yield goes up and the price of the treasury goes down. So as more treasuries are issued, price goes down, yield goes up. So that's what's happening. What that means is that the US dollar is going to drop significantly. And what that means is inflation is, you know, going to rear its head up in a big way. And if for some reason there is anything to do with a war or something like that, or you basically ignite oil prices, then inflation won't just go up, but it'll grow wings, if not a rocket. So the downgrade basically is extremely important. And when Trump was here and going around the Gulf and asking them, to invest trillions over 10 years. I mean, it's very easy to invest, a 2 trillion or 3 trillion over 10 years because nobody knows what's going to happen, in 10 years time. It's like, yeah, I'll give you this. Yeah, of course, brother, all this kind of stuff. So I think that, you've got to take all that stuff with a grain of salt. But I think there's a very interesting guy that I saw on YouTube, a guy called Simon Dixon. And he's saying that basically, for the first time ever, there is more money to be made in peace in the region than to be made by the people, selling by the military industrial complex, selling weapons to the US that gives them to Israel. So I mean, it's incredible. He's basically saying that the GCC actually bought the crown jewels of the US, which is basically like AI and space and all the stuff that Musk was there to sell, and the BlackRock guys and stable coins and all this kind of stuff. So he's saying that the US is looking for capital. They're looking for capital to recapitalize that. And you could see some pushback already in the US with Congress coming and saying, yeah, but we shouldn't do this. And, the AI is a strategic thing and all this kind of stuff. So completely the other way, basically. So very interesting. But yeah, we're all for peace, not no more killing.
Yeah, but maybe not so much for inflation. So which is going to be a probably the beast is still not back in the cage. So no, thank you very much everyone for your time today. Omar Nadja, derivatives trader at BB Energy, Laurie Haitian, MENA Director at Natural Resource Governance Institute, and Omar Al Ubaidli, Director of Research, Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. Thank you all for joining us today. A fascinating discussion. Thanks again.
Thank you.